Man freed a German shepherd, chained for life. What happened next shocked everyone. Defying all odds, a dog whisperer faced a beast born of torment in a forgotten yard where cruelty reigned. Alex's unyielding compassion became the last hope for Gray, a chained dog whose rage masked a desperate plea for freedom. Alex stood in the driveway of a suburban home, the crisp autumn air tinged with the scent of pine as he guided a German shepherd through its final training session with a new family. At 52, with weathered hands and a calm demeanor, Alex was a local legend in his small town, known for rehabilitating troubled dogs. 15 years as a police dog handler and another 10 working privately with aggressive and traumatized animals had honed his instincts, earning him a reputation as the go-to expert for lost causes. The German shepherd, a former rescue named Bella, wagged her tail, nuzzling her new owner's hand. A success story that warmed Alex's heart as he prepared to head home. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment's peace. The voice on the other end belonged to Officer Daniels from the local Animal Control Service, and it trembled with urgency. "Alex, we need you now." "It's bad," Daniels said, his words rushed. "A dog's been chained up its whole life, and it's out of control. We can't get near it." The story was one Alex had heard too often. A dog named Gray, living in the yard of a private house, tied to a doghouse with a heavy metal chain, neglected and isolated. Alex's car was in the shop, but a veterinarian from the Animal Protection Society, Dr. Marissa Lane, offered to pick him up. As they drove through the winding country roads, Marissa filled him in, her voice tight with concern. Gray, a large German Shepherd mix, had spent nearly a decade on that chain, his life a cycle of fear and rage. "He's attacked anyone who gets close," she said, glancing at Alex. "The owner can't even approach. He drugs the dog to change the chain." Even with Alex's extensive experience, the situation sounded daunting. He'd worked with aggressive dogs before, police dogs with sharp instincts, rescues with histories of abuse. But a dog this feral, this broken, was a new challenge. His mind raced, recalling techniques he'd used over the years. Food lures, calming tones, and slow movements. But Marissa's description of Gray's ferocity, lunging, snarling, ready to bite, made him wonder if this might be beyond even his skills. They pulled into a gravel driveway, the house a faded gray with peeling paint, the yard a barren patch of dirt and weeds. The air was thick with tension as Alex stepped out, his boots crunching on the ground, his bag of tools slung over his shoulder. The reality hit harder than the words. Gray stood at the end of his chain, a massive dog with matted fur the color of storm clouds, his eyes wild with fear and fury. The moment he spotted them, he erupted, barking ferociously, his teeth bared as he lunged forward, the chain clanking with each desperate thrust. Alex froze, his breath catching. 25 years of experience, and he'd rarely seen such raw aggression. The dog's owner, a wiry man in his 50s, stood at a safe distance, his arms crossed. "He hasn't let anyone near him for over a year," he explained, his voice tinged with resignation. "I just leave food and walk away. Tried to pet him once. He nearly took my hand off. Last time I replaced the chain, I had to put sleeping pills in his food." Alex pulled a piece of boiled meat from his bag, a method that usually worked to calm aggressive dogs, and tossed it gently toward Gray. The dog didn't even glance at the treat, his barking unrelenting, his eyes locked on the intruders. Only when Alex and Marissa stepped back, giving him space, did Gray dart forward, snatching the meat while keeping his gaze fixed on them, his growl a low rumble of warning. Alex tried speaking in different tones, firm commands, gentle coaxing, but Gray reacted the same to every sound, his barks explosive, his body taut with rage. Then Alex noticed something. When he spoke in a soft, almost melodic tone, the dog's ears twitched slightly, as if straining to catch every word, a flicker of curiosity beneath the fury. The scent of other dogs clung to Alex's clothes. He'd spent the day at the kennel, and Gray paused briefly to sniff the air, his nostrils flaring. But the moment passed and he erupted again, his rage intensifying, his lunges stretching the chain to its limit. The metal clanged, a harsh sound that echoed across the yard, and Alex feared the chain might snap. Or worse, that Gray would injure himself in his frantic attempts to reach them. Marissa glanced at him, her eyes wide. "What now?" she whispered. Alex's mind raced, his years of training colliding with the reality before him. He'd faced tough cases, but this dog's trauma ran deep, a lifetime of isolation and fear distilled into a snarling beast. For a fleeting moment, a grim thought crossed his mind. Perhaps euthanasia was the only humane option, but the idea was unbearable, a betrayal of everything he'd dedicated his life to. He squared his shoulders, his jaw set. This dog deserved a chance, and he'd fight for it, no matter how long it took. Alex sat on the cold, hard ground of the barren yard, his back to Gray as the last rays of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the dirt. The air grew crisp, a chill settling in as dusk deepened, but Alex remained still, his movements deliberate, his presence a quiet challenge to the dog's fury. Gray's chain clinked softly, the sound a stark reminder of the years of confinement that had turned him into a creature of rage. The dog's growls had softened to a low rumble, his amber eyes still fixed on Alex, but there was a new note in the silence. Confusion, as if the dog couldn't understand why this human hadn't left, why he wasn't trying to approach. Marissa and the owner stood at the far edge of the yard, their breaths visible in the cooling air, watching in tense silence as Alex worked. The past hour had been a test of patience. Alex had tried every trick in his arsenal, boiled meat, calming tones, slow movements. But Gray's aggression had held firm, his barks a wall of sound that kept everyone at bay. Yet Alex had noticed a pattern. When he spoke softly, the dog's ears twitched, a sign of curiosity beneath the fear. When he moved too quickly, Gray lunged, the chains straining with a metallic groan. But if he kept his hands low and moved at a glacial pace, the dog's tension eased, his eyes flickering with something new. Alex decided to shift tactics, turning away from Gray, pretending to inspect a weed in the dirt, his body language non-threatening. The barking pause replaced by a low growl, and in that brief silence Alex felt a spark of hope. The dog was watching, assessing, his rage giving way to uncertainty. He began a slow approach, taking tiny steps, sometimes stopping for 15 or 20 minutes to let Gray adjust to his presence at each new distance. The dog no longer barked constantly, though the growling persisted, a steady undercurrent of distrust. Any movement of Alex's hand toward him reignited a surge of aggression. But if he kept his hand low, moving it with the slowness of molasses, Gray's tension eased, his eyes narrowing with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Alex's clothes still carried the scent of other dogs, a faint reminder of his day at the kennel, and Gray's nostrils flared, his growl softening as he processed the familiar smell. It wasn't enough to calm him, but it was a crack in the wall, a glimmer of connection Alex clung to. Dark thoughts crept in as the hours dragged on. Alex had seen trauma before. Dogs beaten, starved, abandoned. But Gray's case was extreme, a decade of isolation that had turned him into a feral creature. At one point, the thought of euthanasia surfaced, a grim whisper that made his stomach churn. He'd dedicated his life to saving dogs, to giving them a second chance, and the idea of giving up on Gray felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. He pushed the thought aside, his jaw tightening. "Not yet," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. He'd try one last approach, a method he'd used with the most broken dogs, pure, unyielding patience. He asked Marissa and the owner to step back as far as possible, their figures retreating to the edge of the property, leaving Alex alone with Gray. He sat down again, a few steps from the doghouse, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze averted. Time stretched, the sun dipping below the horizon, the yard bathed in twilight's gray light. Gray's growls continued, but their tone shifted, carrying hints of uncertainty, even curiosity. Why wasn't this person leaving? Why wasn't he advancing? What did he want? Another hour and a half passed, the stars emerging overhead, and then something extraordinary happened. Gray stopped growling, his posture relaxed slightly, his tail lowering from its tight tuck, his lips softening, though his teeth remained faintly visible. Alex pulled out a special pole designed for working with aggressive dogs, his movements slow and deliberate. This was the moment. It was now or never. Any sudden motion could reignite Gray's rage, but the dog's newfound calm gave Alex a sliver of hope. To everyone's astonishment, Gray allowed him to approach, his body taut as a bowstring, but his aggression held at bay. Alex's hands trembled as he released the chain, the heavy metal falling to the ground with a dull thud. The moment it hit, something shifted in Gray, as if an invisible spring inside him unwound. He stood still, then took a cautious step forward, free for the first time in years. When they moved him into the Animal Protection Society's van, no one could believe their eyes. Gray walked calmly, his head low but his movements steady, no longer trying to bite or escape. Alex chose to spend a few more hours with him, sitting in the van as the night deepened, his presence a quiet anchor. Without the chain, Gray began to change before their eyes. At first, the shifts were subtle, his posture relaxed, his gaze softened, his tail giving a faint wag. Then for the first time, he sniffed Alex's outstretched hand, not to bite, but to investigate, his nose brushing Alex's skin with a tentative curiosity. Within hours, something miraculous unfolded. Gray approached Alex, seeking affection, his body pressing against Alex's leg. His eyes no longer filled with fear, but with a budding trust. Alex's heart swelled, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You're going to be okay, boy." Knowing that Gray's journey to healing had just begun, the sun rose over the rolling fields near Alex's rural home, its golden light filtering through the morning mist, casting a warm glow on Gray as he bounded through the grass, free for the first time in years. The air was crisp with the scent of dew and wildflowers, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the oak trees that lined the property. Gray's once matted fur, now clean and brushed, shimmered in the dawn, his amber eyes no longer wild with rage but bright with curiosity, darting toward every new sound. A bird's chirp, a squirrel's scamper. Alex stood on the porch of his modest farmhouse, a mug of coffee steaming in his hands, his weathered face softening into a smile as he watched the German Shepherd mix explore the world beyond the chain that had once defined his life. It had been 2 weeks since that fateful evening in the yard, and Gray's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The first days after Gray's rescue were a delicate dance of trust. Alex had brought him home temporarily, setting up a spacious kennel in his backyard with soft bedding, toys, and a sturdy water bowl. He knew Gray needed time to unlearn the fear, to shed the trauma of a decade in chains, to rediscover what it meant to be a dog. The initial hours were tense. Gray paced the kennel, his tail low, his growls resurfacing whenever Alex approached too quickly. But Alex, with his 25 years of experience, moved with the patience of a man who understood broken things. He sat outside the kennel for hours, speaking in the soft, melodic tone that had first caught Gray's attention, offering treats through the bars, never pushing too hard. "You're safe now," he'd murmur, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of Gray's uncertainty. By the third day, Gray's wariness began to crack. He sniffed Alex's hand without snapping, his tail giving a tentative wag, a small but seismic shift. Alex introduced him to the yard, a wide expanse of grass where he could run, and Gray hesitated at first, his paws tentative on the unfamiliar ground. But then he took off, his movements clumsy at first, then fluid, a joyous sprint that ended with him rolling in the grass, his tongue lolling out in a pant that looked like a smile. Alex laughed, a rare sound that echoed across the field, his heart swelling with pride. He began daily training sessions, simple commands like sit and stay, using treats and praise to build Gray's confidence. The dog learned quickly, his eagerness to please a stark contrast to the snarling beast he'd been, his tail wagging furiously each time Alex clapped in approval. Socialization came next. Alex introduced Gray to his own dogs, 2 gentle German shepherds, Max and Luna, who had helped rehabilitate countless rescues over the years. At first, Gray growled, his hackles raised, but Max and Luna were unfazed, their calm demeanor a soothing balm. They played gently, nudging Gray with their noses, inviting him to chase, And within days, the trio was inseparable, tumbling through the yard in a joyful tangle of fur. Alex watched, his chest tight with emotion, as Gray learned to trust again, his body language softening, his eyes losing their haunted edge. Marissa, the veterinarian who'd been there the night of Gray's rescue, visited often, her disbelief evident as she snapped photos for the Animal Control Service. "I can't believe this is the same dog," she said, her voice thick with awe as Gray nudged her hand for a pet, his tail thumping the ground. The challenge now was finding Gray a permanent home. Alex knew he couldn't keep him. His house was a revolving door for rescues, and Gray deserved a family to call his own. But the thought of letting him go brought a pang of worry. Gray had come so far, his once feral nature replaced by a gentle, eager spirit. But what if his new family couldn't handle him? What if he reverted to fear? Alex spent sleepless nights poring over adoption applications, rejecting any that didn't feel right, his protective instincts as fierce as Gray's newfound loyalty. He wanted a family that understood dogs, that would continue his training, that would never, ever chain him again. The breakthrough came on a crisp morning when a young couple, the Millers, arrived to meet Gray. They were experienced dog owners, having fostered rescues before, and their gentle energy put Alex at ease. Gray bounded over to them, his tail wagging, his nose sniffing their hands with curiosity. Within minutes, he was lying at their feet, his head resting on the wife's knee as she scratched behind his ears, her husband laughing as Gray rolled over for a belly rub. Alex watched, a lump in his throat, as the connection formed, a perfect match. "He's yours," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, and the Millers' smiles lit up the yard, their gratitude evident as they hugged Gray, promising him a life of love. As the Millers drove away with Gray in the back seat, his head out the window, Alex stood on his porch, the morning sun warm on his face. He'd given Gray a new dawn, a second chance at life, but the dog had given him something too, a reminder of why he did this work, a renewed faith in the resilience of broken hearts. Gray's journey was far from over, but as the car disappeared down the road, Alex knew he'd set him on a path to happiness, a path free from the chains of his past. Alex stood before a packed room at a local community center, his hand gripping an old rusted chain as he faced the crowd, his voice steady but brimming with emotion as he began to speak. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the faces of animal advocates, shelter workers, and dog owners gathered for his lecture on the dangers of chaining dogs. It was spring 2025, 6 months since Gray's rescue, and the German Shepherd mix now lived happily with the Millers, his new family, in a suburban home with a fenced yard and endless belly rubs. But tonight, Alex wasn't just sharing a success story. He was wielding Gray's tail as a weapon against cruelty, a call to action that resonated with every person in the room. The chain in his hand, the same one that had bound Gray for a decade, gleamed dully, a symbol of the suffering he'd fought to end. He held up a photo of Gray on the day of his rescue, matted fur, bared teeth, eyes wild with fear, and the audience gasped, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Then he showed a recent picture, Gray lying on a plush dog bed, his coat glossy, his eyes soft with trust as he nuzzled the Miller's young daughter. The contrast was staggering, and Alex's voice cracked as he recounted the journey. "This dog was a monster to the world, a feral beast ready to attack," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "But he wasn't born that way. A chain did this to him. 10 years of isolation, fear, and neglect turned him into something he was never meant to be. All it took to save him was removing that chain, physically and mentally, and giving him a chance to be a dog again." The story of Gray had spread far beyond their small town. After the Millers adopted him, Alex shared his transformation on social media, the before and after photos going viral, shared by animal welfare groups across the country. The images of a snarling Gray on his chain, then a joyful Gray playing fetch in a park, struck a chord, igniting conversations about the cruelty of chaining dogs. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention statistics, which Alex cited in his lecture, underscored the urgency. Chained dogs were nearly 3 times more likely to bite adults and 5 times more likely to bite children. their aggression a direct result of confinement and fear. Chains don't just restrict movement, Alex said, holding the rusted metal high. They break spirits. They create monsters out of companions. Inspired by Gray, Alex became a vocal advocate, his lectures drawing crowds eager to learn how to protect dogs from such suffering. He partnered with local shelters, pushing for laws to ban chaining, and worked with lawmakers to draft ordinances that required proper enclosures and regular veterinary care. The story of Gray became a rallying cry, sparking campaigns that raised funds for rescue organizations, built fenced dog parks, and educated communities on humane treatment. Families who had chained their dogs began reaching out, asking for help, and Alex guided them with the same patience he'd shown Gray, helping them build safe spaces where their pets could thrive. "Every chain we remove is a life we save," he'd tell them, his voice firm with conviction. Gray's new life with the Millers was a testament to what was possible. Photos from the family showed him lounging on their couch, playing tug-of-war with their daughter, even sleeping at the foot of their bed, his tail wagging in his dreams. The Millers sent Alex regular updates, their gratitude evident in every message. "He's our heart," they wrote in one email, attaching a picture of Gray at the beach, his fur wet from the waves, his eyes alight with joy. Alex kept that photo on his desk, a reminder of why he fought, a beacon of hope on the days when the weight of his work felt heavy. He'd failed dogs before, cases too far gone, traumas too deep. But Gray had shown him that redemption was always possible, that even the most broken could heal with love and time. The lecture ended with a standing ovation, the crowd's applause echoing through the room as Alex set the chain down, its clank a final note of defiance. A young woman approached him afterward, her eyes shining with tears. "I chained my dog for years," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't know better, but I'm going to change that tonight, because of Gray." Alex nodded, his throat tight, and handed her a pamphlet on building a proper enclosure, his hands steady as he offered her a path forward. Moments like these were his fuel, the ripple effects of Gray's story, a legacy he'd never anticipated. Back home, Alex sat on his porch, the evening air cool against his skin, his two German shepherds, Max and Luna, at his feet. He thought of Gray, picturing him with the Millers, his tail wagging, his life a far cry from the chained nightmare he'd endured. Alex's mission continued, more dogs to save, more chains to break. But Gray's story had become a cornerstone, a reminder of the power of compassion. "Every time I see a dog on a chain," he told the crowd, "I remember Gray's eyes, first full of fear and rage, then gratitude and trust. And I realize that nothing is impossible if you truly want to help." As the stars emerged overhead, Alex knew Gray's legacy would echo on, breaking the chains of cruelty one heart at a time.